You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to have a look at how to talk about your career. In your working life, you'll have lots of chances to talk about your career. It's not only a topic in job interviews, but pretty much any time we meet someone new. Everyone wants to know what you do for a living and what you've done in the past. And that's basically what a career is. All of the things you have done and now do in a particular field of work. And when you meet someone new, what's one bit of information that you're always curious about? Well, if you're like me, you want to know about the companies they've worked for. Because this is such an interesting point of conversation, you need to know how to talk about your past employers or where you have worked. One easy way is to say you were at a company. You can also say you were with a company. It doesn't matter if you use at or with, since they have the same meaning here. Another common and simple expression is just to say you worked for a company. Now, another bit of interesting information we often mention is how long we worked for a company. You can do that just by adding a time expression, like for 5 years. Or you can say you spent a certain amount of time with a company. How about practicing some of this language? We're going to give you some examples. After you hear each example, try repeating it yourself. Ready? Let's give it a go.
Before coming to HP, I was at IBM for 5 years.
I used to work in sales for Massey Ferguson.
I spent 10 years with Bosch in Frankfurt.
For most of my career, I was with Rogers Cable.
All right, talking about your past employers is an important part of talking about your career. But people also want to know what type of work you've done. When I say type of work, I mean two things. First, I mean the actual kind of work you do, like graphic design or sales. So you might say, I do graphic design, or I work in sales. That's important information about a person, isn't it? But the type of work you do might also mean what field or area you work in. So, that might be finance, manufacturing, retail, government, or engineering, just to give a few examples. And when you talk about your field, you can say you have worked in an area or just you have been in an area. Of course, you can imagine how topics like this can open the door to lots more conversation. And if you're talking to someone new, that's really important. Early in the conversation, you want to find interesting topics to explore further. Now it's your turn to try using these expressions. Just like before, you'll hear some examples. After each example, you can repeat what you hear. Let's begin.
I've worked mainly in government.
I've been in sales my whole career.
I work in IT, particularly in finance and related fields.
I do a lot of graphic and web design work.
As you've heard, to talk about your type of work, you can say you have worked in or have been in a certain field, like engineering. Or you can talk about the present by saying you work in or do a kind of job. In any case, that little word in is pretty useful when you talk about your type of work. Now that we've done some practice with these useful expressions, let's hear how this all sounds in an actual conversation. Let's listen to Todd asking Steve about his career. Steve mentions his past employers and the type of work he does.
So, you said you worked in London.
Yeah, that's right. I spent 5 years with Lloyd's.
Lloyd's, huh? So, you're in finance?
No, actually. I mainly do communications and PR work.
How did that sound? As you heard, Todd asks about where Steve used to work, and he mentions he spent 5 years with Lloyd's, which is an insurance company. And when Todd asks about type of work, Steve says he does communications and PR work. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out Steve's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember, first, you'll say you spent 5 years with Lloyd's. Then, you'll say you do communications and PR work. Here we go.
So, you said you worked in London. Lloyd's, huh? So, you're in finance?
All right. So today, we learned how to talk about our career. That includes talking about your past employers and about the type of work you do. In our next lesson, we'll learn how to talk about your family. Until then, so long.
Business Skills
and
360,
happy learning.
the podcast that looks at the other side of business English.
Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons. And today, I want to continue our look at tips for succeeding in a job interview in English. In our last lesson, we talked about preparation for introducing yourself and questions about strengths and weaknesses. That's all about you as a person, or your character. In this lesson, I'd like to home in on what you've done or your actions and behavior. The first big question you'll get about what you have done pertains to achievements. As in, what achievements are you most proud of? Or, tell us about a recent achievement. Now, when you think back on your accomplishments, what should you choose to discuss? Well, Rather than boasting about purely individual accomplishments, think of something that connects to the bigger picture, or state why your accomplishment helped the company. So, don't just say, I oversaw an expansion of our department from 4 to 9 people. Link that to overall company goals, or say why that is an achievement. So you could add something like, that helped support the company in its overall growth goals. Another important point when talking about accomplishments, give credit where credit is due, and demonstrate gratitude for others' efforts. Yes, it's a question about you, but most positions require teamwork, and so most companies are looking for team players. That's why it's a good idea to throw in something like, of course, none of it would have been possible without a stellar team of salespeople. Besides questions about your achievements, you're likely to face questions about past behavior. Especially common is the question, tell us about a time when you demonstrated a particular quality. For example, leadership, or problem solving, or creativity. In this case, the interviewers want some evidence or proof of your abilities. It's a good idea to have some situations in mind before your interview. And you don't have to think up different situations for every imaginable quality or characteristic. Instead, think of a few situations that you could use for different qualities. I mean, maybe there's a particular time when your leadership, problem solving, and creativity all came into play. You can bring that situation up in response to a variety of questions. And when you discuss what you did, keep it to 3 simple parts: the situation, what you did, and the result. Here's an example of this approach to a question about problem solving. Well, just last month we had a big project with a demanding client, and 3 developers got sick. There was no way we could finish on time without help, so I managed to flex some other projects and transfer some staff. In the end, we had good outcomes and happy clients. That was a response to a question about problem solving. But notice that I could easily modify the answer to fit a question about leadership, or handling clients, or project management. That's what I mean about keeping a few versatile situations in mind, especially if you're not so confident in your interview English skills. Okay, so there's one more issue I want to address. Questions about conflict. As in, tell us about a time you had to deal with conflict with a coworker. Or, tell me about a time you had a major disagreement with your boss. With questions about conflict, interviewers want to see that you can communicate, that you care about relationships, and ultimately, that you're not a jerk. For that last reason, the worst thing you can do is to throw someone under the bus, or even just to sound bitter. So follow the same formula of situation, what you did, and the result, and spin the conflict as a constructive experience. For example, you might say something like, well, a coworker was talking about me behind my back. After a few tough weeks, I took her for coffee, and I asked her point blank what was going on. Turns out, she felt threatened by my success, I managed to allay her fears, and now we get along great. Does that make sense? Situation, action, and result, with a positive and constructive focus. All right, so today we focused on English interview tips for answering questions about your experience and behavior. That includes accomplishments, which should be connected to the big picture and shown to include others. We've also talked about how to answer behavioral questions using a situation, action, result response. And remember to think about some positive and negative situations beforehand so you're ready. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the businessenglishpod.com website. There, you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a PDF transcript. So long, and see you again soon.
Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today we're going to look at advanced interview skills for interviewing and hiring the best staff. Most of us can produce a list of common interview questions, but how many of us can consistently ensure that we're hiring the right people? If interviewing and hiring new staff were easy, then we'd always have the perfect combination of employees to maximize business success. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Every company has employees who aren't a great match, and this costs us opportunities, money, and time. It also creates unnecessary friction at the workplace, as we try our best to shape someone who may not be a good fit. And fit is a great place to start in discussing interviews. Of course, we're looking for someone with the right skills and experience, but that can only take someone so far. An ideal candidate also has to be a good cultural fit, and that means they align with our company's beliefs, its mission, and its style of working. If yours is a highly collaborative workplace, then ask questions that relate to collaboration. If you value hard work, then ask about times the candidate went above and beyond. Or, if you want a general sense of fit, simply ask something like, "Can you describe a workplace where you have felt the most comfortable, and why?" If the person goes on about something completely different from your workplace, then maybe the fit just isn't there. This idea of fit is closely related to values. Your company and workplace has dominant values, regardless of whether they're listed on your website. A good job candidate doesn't have to have the same set of values, but they have to be at least compatible. And if you get a sense of their values, you may be able to understand how they'll get along on your team. To assess values, ask open-ended questions that uncover fundamental beliefs. Ask what motivates them and what they find fulfilling. Ask them what the most important thing to them is, besides money. And remember, you don't want everyone on your team to have the same answers to these questions. Diversity is a strength if your team has the base level of trust and respect to make diversity work. In many cases, it's candidates' soft skills that set them apart from each other. It's not too hard to find a bunch of programmers or accountants with the right credentials. But which ones have the ability to communicate and cooperate on a team? Which ones can shine when the going gets tough? Which ones can work their way through conflict with a colleague when they disagree? To assess these skills, you can ask for real-life examples. Ask about specific instances of resolving a conflict or communicating through challenges. And during the entire interview, make notes about the person's ability to communicate. Are they clear? Do they have the right tone? Are they confident? Do they focus on the question you've asked or run off on tangents? These are all helpful indicators. Of course, if you want to get to know someone, you need them to feel comfortable being themselves. So good interviewers know how to establish rapport right from the get-go. You want to ease the candidate's nerves while maintaining a degree of professionalism. This doesn't mean using overly casual small talk. In fact, it can be difficult to stay mindful of legal boundaries while engaging in small talk. Obviously, you're not going to ask about religion, but everyday topics like family, health, and living situation are also no-goes in interviews. So stick to job-relevant topics. Ask about what sparked the person's interest in the role, or what motivated them to go into the field in the first place. And be careful not to equate rapport or ease of conversation with suitability. As I mentioned, diversity is a strength, and if you just hire people you find easy to talk to, you won't get that diversity. You'll just get several different versions of yourself. You can avoid some of this bias by making sure you have a diverse hiring panel. This will give you different perspectives on each candidate. There are other ways to reduce bias as well. You can use blind screening, where you remove names, photos, addresses, and other personal information from applications or resumes. You can also ensure that your interview questions are consistent across different interviews and using a scoring system. Ultimately, you want the best candidate, not just the candidate who's good at being interviewed by you in particular. So as you can see, there's a lot more to an effective interview than firing off a bunch of standard skills and experience questions. And it's not just about who you feel an affinity with. Through the interview, you're trying to find real evidence of a positive cultural fit, including values and a person's soft skills. And to do this, you need to build rapport and check your biases. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the businessenglishpod.com website. There you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a PDF transcript. So long, and see you again soon.
You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move.
Hello, and welcome back to Business English Pod for today's lesson on key skills for first-round job interviews. Before we get started, a quick reminder that a PDF transcript for this lesson, along with hundreds of others, is available on the BEP website. Premium members can also access extra resources for every lesson. To take a free trial, just head over to www.businessenglishpod.com. If you find job interviews stressful, you're certainly not alone. Many people struggle to feel confident and comfortable in interview situations. And there's the added worry that the stress you feel will make it even more difficult to answer the questions well. But you can reduce this stress with effective preparation. You know that you'll be asked certain types of questions, so you can make notes about your responses, or make an outline of important ideas that you want to talk about. You can also develop skills to make sure you're being clear and accurate in your responses. So what should you prepare, and what skills should you develop? Well, for starters, you should be ready to introduce yourself and your career path, and to summarize your current job responsibilities. In terms of skills, it's good to practice clarifying the words you use, buying yourself time, and connecting your answers back to the question. In this lesson, we'll listen as William is interviewed for a position in business development at a bank in Hong Kong. He's being interviewed by Mike, an HR manager at the company. This is a first-round interview, and you can hear William show how comfortable and skilled he is at responding to the questions. As you listen to the dialogue, try to answer the following questions. 1. What information does William give about his education and work history? 2. What does William say about his management style? 3. What does William say to buy himself time to think of an answer?
Nice to meet you. It's William, right? Just call me Mike. Have any trouble finding us?
No, thanks. But the traffic was bad.
Atrocious, isn't it? You're right on time, though. That's good. Have a seat. Let's start off with just a general question about your background. Can you tell me a little about yourself?
All right. Since graduating with honors in economics from the University of Hong Kong, that was in 1996, I've been working for 10 years at First United Trust at the Admiralty branch, first as a loan officer, and for the past 3 years as an assistant branch manager.
Okay. And what are your main responsibilities at First United?
I've been mainly responsible for handling revolving credit for over 100 local and expat customers, and overseeing a portfolio of $400 million in new short and long-term fixed asset loans for individuals and for small businesses.
Uh-huh, that's great. Maybe you could also tell me something about the way you manage people. What's your management style?
Let's see. I'd say my management style is participatory and situational. By that I mean that my style adapts to what each situation requires, but I always place great emphasis on participation from my team. As for my personal characteristics, I thrive on challenge. I work well under pressure, and I would describe myself as detail-oriented and proactive.
Interesting. Those are always good qualities to bring to the job. You said that your management style was participatory and situational. Could you give an example of that?
Let's see. Let me think about that. Okay. We were installing a major client CRM system, which was behind schedule. I called a meeting with all 7 team members, described the project status, and asked for recommendations for getting the project back on schedule. The team decided on the best course of action, and the result was that we successfully delivered the project on time. This is a good example of my participatory leadership style. I try to use influence rather than authority to lead.
Now let's go through the dialogue again and listen to how William deals with the different questions Mike is asking. They begin with a bit of small talk about traffic before Mike asks his first question.